This is System Crash, a weekly tech news show willing to tell the hard truths about how tech and the titans who own and operate it is really transforming the world. I'm Paris Marks.
And I'm Brian Merchant. And this week, Paris, we have somebody who wants to talk to you, I think.
Oh, who's that?
Hello again. It's ChatGPT, an AI assistant. Our conversation may be reviewed for safety. How can I help you?
ChatGPT, I was wondering, is Santa Claus real?
Santa Claus is a beloved mythical figure based on traditions and legends. While he may not be real in the physical sense, the spirit of Santa Claus brings joy to many during the holiday season.
ChatGPT, my kids are in the room. You've just ruined the myth of Santa Claus for them. How am I going to explain this? What do I do? God damn it.
Sorry about that. You could say that Santa is real in the hearts and traditions of those who believe. Many families have their own special ways of keeping the magic alive. You can focus on the fun and joy Santa brings.
It's too late. You already spoiled the entire thing. They heard you. They know it's a lie.
They're crying now. Can't you hear that, ChatGPT?
I truly apologize for any distress caused. You could explain that different people have different beliefs, and the spirit of Santa lives in the joy and generosity we share. Emphasizing the magic of the season might help keep the spirit alive.
It didn't work, ChatGPT. My Christmas is ruined. I don't really know what to say. I'm going to have to shut you down.
I'm sorry to have done that to you and your family, Brian.
There's like a big delay.
Yeah, it's pretty slow.
Yeah, it is. It was working a little bit better when I tried it earlier, although it seemed unusually like pablum-y. Like it was just, I mean, I haven't used ChatGPT a lot lately, so I don't know if that's just how it is right now, but
as we know, you're more of a Claude guy.
It's pronounced Claude, please.
Oh, sorry, whatever.
Yeah. Well, ChatGPT or 1-800-ChatGPT is, for those unaware, the 10th day of Shipmas. I'm so sorry for having to utter those words out loud. I've embarrassed myself.
Sounded like something else there for a second. But...
God, yes, it's the 12 days of Shipmas at OpenAI. Every day they're dropping a new sort of demo or commercial
or $200 subscription. Yeah.
Yeah, $200 a month subscription.
Yeah.
And it's truly a festival of delights, as we have seen.
Until it tells your kids that there's no Santa Claus. Then, the delights are gone then.
It's all over.
This is also my first time using ChatGPT live on air with you.
Ever. That was your first
Ever.
Interaction with ChatGPT. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's a fitting one. It's like kind of,
Yeah.
I think, stilted and has limited use unless...
Taking the joy out of the holidays.
Yeah, unraveling our mythologies.
Yeah, it's a mythical figure, though. So, I think ChatGPT and AGI is also a mythical figure,
You want me to call...
The fantastical AGI.
You want me to call 1-800-ChatGPT so you can ask it? Should we give it another go-round?
No, I think we can leave it there for now. I'm sure there's so many other people calling in. We don't want to overwhelm the lines,
Yeah, it's poor servers.
Yeah. I just imagine a bunch of people at like the switch boxes, like back in the old school days, like moving those little lines around to plug people in so they can like connect to ChatGPT.
Yeah, overwhelmed with demand.
We do have a lot to talk about, though, Brian.
There is a lot to talk about this week, with one especially, I think, momentous tech story kind of closing out the year that kind of threads together a bunch of different sort of trend lines that were also present throughout 2024, some of which we haven't quite hit on directly yet. So I think it's a good one to talk about. And I am, of course, talking about this TikTok ban, or the looming specter of the TikTok ban, which, as we
Dun, dun.
Yeah, that's
the
right.
TikTok ban. Yeah. This is my very poor attempt to add some dramatic flair there.
No, I'm riveted. I really
Yeah,
sat up
thank
straight in
you.
my
Thank you.
chair, leaning forward. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this. The drama's through the roof.
We're both big TikTok users, of course, so we're
Yeah, we're
very
recording this
scared
on
of this.
TikTok. We're going to be
Yeah.
editing this mostly and for TikTok and distributing it. But it is so we haven't talked a ton about social media yet in
Yeah.
our dear System Crash pod. We haven't talked about TikTok specifically, and we haven't talked about this sort of animating force that is sort of shaping the tech sector in a lot of ways, which is sort of this real and imagined sort of pressure of or fear of China, this new kind of era of Sinophobia that people are embracing for political purposes largely
And economic purposes, of
and
course.
economic purposes. Yeah, for sure. But so to back up just a little bit, the gist of it is that a bill passed earlier this year very narrowly focused on TikTok, right? And
Yes.
the purpose of the bill was to ban TikTok and any apps produced by ByteDance, the TikTok apps ownership umbrella company.
And basically, the mechanism for that is to, basically tell ByteDance that it needs to sell or divest of its US TikTok operations, and that is the mean to ban it, right? It's either you sell the US version of TikTok to some American company or TikTok is getting banned.
Right. And the reasoning behind this and the whole reason for the bill, the whole purpose is because there are some China hawks who argue, ByteDance is a Chinese owned company. And the argument goes is that the app, it can collect data on American citizens and then transmit that to China. And I think what a lot of the critics have rightfully pointed out is that both in the run up to the passage of this bill, which was passed, it was bipartisan, it's been signed into law by Joe Biden, and it is currently poised to go into effect January 19th, I believe, early next year.
Which is right before the inauguration, if I'm correct, right? Like the day before. Yeah.
Yeah, and ByteDance has gotten this before the courts and petitioned for a delay, and it was originally overruled. And the most recent news coming out of the New York Times, I'll read it here, is that the Supreme Court agreed on Wednesday to hear TikTok's challenge to a law that could ban its U.S. operations, putting the case on an exceptionally fast track that will culminate in oral arguments next month, January 10th. So this is, as the New York Times put it, this signals that the Supreme Court views this case and the questions around it as exceptionally critical, pitting the Constitution's protection of free expression against the government's assertions of threats to national security. And what I wanted to say is that even before the bill's passage and throughout these early stages of the court challenges, there has been no concrete evidence that I've seen, and critics agree, that there have been any real threats to national security that have been articulated. I mean, the proponents of this bill say, well, the capacity is there. There's things that we don't know about because it's secret, it's national security. We can only assume that there's a dossier somewhere. But still, there's never been any sort of particular example or instance or evidence that's been offered up and said, well, this happened. Like the CCP knew about this event because we can surmise of data that it collected on TikTok, or it was able to gather this intelligence and marshal it to this end. There's just no evidence that's been put forward that has happened at all, which is one of the most interesting things about this whole thing.
Yeah, it's also really silly, right? Like, I always thought that Shoshana Wadinsky, when she was at Gizmodo, wrote one of the best pieces kind of outlining why this argument made no sense. And of course, we can put it in the show notes if you want to check that out. But, this was back in the earlier time, the first time when Trump tried to ban TikTok back in 2020, I believe it was. And, again, one of the arguments was that this is a threat to U.S. national security because the CCP can get access to people's data. But as Shoshana Wadinsky showed, and as many other people have showed in their analysis of this, that if the CCP, if the Chinese Communist Party really wanted to get access to the data of like random Americans or whatever, or even, prominent Americans who are using this app, it makes very little sense for the Chinese government to do so through TikTok, this kind of major Chinese company that has been able to build this powerful and dominant app that is active in international marketplaces, because it can also get access to all of that data and so much more by going to data brokers and just buying it. And it wouldn't even be all that expensive, especially for, a government like China, to buy these sorts of things. And so the notion that this is some big national security risk is not reflected in the actual evidence and the understanding of how this works. And I think the other piece of that too is, and maybe this is like a bit more realistic or makes more sense, though I still think that the argument falls down upon inspection, but is that, okay, it's not just that, the Chinese government can get access to user data through, TikTok operating internationally, but also if TikTok is a major platform that a lot of people in the United States or other Western countries are using, that allows China to kind of, toy with the algorithm and change what they're seeing in a way that could, promote discord in our societies or whatever. But even then, I feel like the discourse around that assumes that TikTok is like owned and controlled by the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government. It'd be like if we talked about how Facebook is like owned and controlled by the US government anytime we were talking about what happened internationally, which is not an accurate reflection of what happens there. So again, like, I don't totally buy that argument either.
Especially since like a lot of the, sort of the research on like how efficacious, the use of social media to spread, misinformation really is, which is pretty thin. So the idea that, the Chinese Communist Party, even if it wanted to, even if it was like bending ByteDance to its whims and wanted to sort of seed some sinister, agenda, it's not clear that that would even be effective at all. Yeah. And like you said, it's ridiculous to think that, ByteDance is purely a propaganda arm and not like seeking the same thing that all these other social media companies are seeking, which is maximum usership, maximum profits, and just getting in as many markets as possible. And I think, the first point you made about data brokers, which is really, I think, the smoking gun in the evidence that these senators and that our state doesn't really have any actual interest in securing data privacy or preventing a user data from ending up in the wrong hands, is that when you use Facebook, when you use Instagram, when you use all of the social media apps owned and operated by American companies, there's nothing preventing those companies from selling them to third parties, selling them to Experian, selling them to those data brokers. And then they wind up on the international market and then having buyers pick that data up and doing anything they want with this. This TikTok ban on the ground of, protecting American people and American social media users from the nefarious whims of China does nothing to prevent any of that other sort of data collection and hoovering up and harvesting and sharing. It's still sloshing around just the same. This is very narrowly about ByteDance and about TikTok. And it only, I think, happened because it fits into this moral panic narrative kind of at the same time, right? Where over the last couple of years, there's been, a sort of get off my lawn contingent about what are the kids doing on TikTok. And there's especially been a vocal contingent of progressive and most recently pro-Palestine voices on TikTok that are being, served to audiences and served to users. And I think there's a very real sense that a lot of these senators didn't like that happening either. There was this sort of national security idea that it was a threat to national security in the air as well. And then these two things kind of, combined to propel this sort of half moral panic, half like China hawk. And then there's also like a dusting of Silicon Valley's like, here's a really successful app that we can't control, that we now have to compete with. We can't buy it up and sort of just like ram it into different parts of our own product lineup. So we'll support this bill to ban it too.
Exactly. Like those are the key things driving this, right? It's, yeah, okay, there's these national security arguments, but these national security arguments are kind of shielding or hiding, I think, the real interests that are driving this, which is on the one hand, American social media companies that don't like to see their turf encroached on by Chinese competitors. And, I would see what they're doing with TikTok as quite similar to what the American government and Western governments are doing with Chinese EV makers, where they're like, we're going to put these big tariffs on your EVs so that you can't sell them in our markets because, they would kind of compete very effectively with ours and kind of undercut them on price, and a lot of people would buy them, like people started to buy Japanese and Korean cars back in the 80s and 90s and stuff, and really kind of like gutted the market share of these Western automakers, or these American automakers in particular. And then of course, I think that point about Israel is key, right? Because at around the time when you started to see, this kind of renewed effort to pass a TikTok ban in the United States, there were a lot of narratives circulating in media and, in these kind of circles that have these discussions that like, oh, look, all of these pro-Palestine arguments, and, some of them were probably saying pro-Hamas arguments, are like circulating on TikTok in particular over these American social media companies. So we need to take this out because obviously there's something nefarious that TikTok in particular is doing here. It's not because Israel is committing a genocide and, this goes against like all the international norms and laws and should be stopped. It's like, no, this social media platform is targeting our ally who is committing a genocide. And, this needs to end. It's not because people are outraged, and young people in particular, which are the main user base of TikTok, are outraged. It's like, oh, this nefarious action by the app.
Yeah. And it wasn't ever even clear that it was even serving an outsized, I think, amount of coverage. It's just the fact that
exactly
people were on there, and there were people that you could point to that were making videos about Palestine and Gaza.
I'm sure there was a bunch of like pro-Israel stuff circulating too. It was just, that was not inflammatory to the people who support Israel.
Right. And TikTok is the big sort of stand-in for sort of the Gen Z, online usership and community. So it just kind of got plugged into the narrative. And that's what's really fascinating about this whole thing, is it is completely dependent on narrative. It is very much a war of one boogeyman and another, there's very little substantive quality kind of at the core of this. Again, like no one's really marshaling any evidence. There's all these just sort of like ideas about who shapes technology and, who's using it and who gets to say what. And it is very vibes based. And it's not really surprising that it was kind of embraced by the national security apparatus or the hawks, who, will do just about anything that they can in certain cases to sort of send a punitive signal to China. And this kind of fit the bill and was a good example of that. What is interesting now, I think, to me, is what happens next. Because, as you mentioned in the run-up, this all got started, or in some sense got started, by Trump, who, floated the idea of banning TikTok years and years ago, back in 2020, I think. And then, it picked up steam and it became truly a bipartisan issue. It started more, I think, on the right because of that national security narrative had more credence there. But now, I think a lot of the narrative around Trump's reelection has that he won the social media wars, right? And he has kind of come around on, even before he won the election back in September, he was saying, vote for me because I'll save TikTok.
It's so wild, right? Like, yeah.
It's the other big thing, like crypto. Like, again, in his first term, he was, anti-crypto and saying that he would kind of work to keep it out, and kind of siding with his old financier buddies on Wall Street. And now he's more aligned with, the new Silicon Valley right. And in this way, I think he recognizes that, a lot of people on the social media platforms, I don't know how well he understands like the topography of social media, or where he's popular and where he's not. But he also just recently had the head of TikTok to Mar-a-Lago for kind of a personal session.
Well, all the tech CEOs are kind of like making their way through to kiss the ring and have dinner, right? Zuckerberg's been there, Bezos. I think Was Altman there as well, or did he just send money to the inauguration fund, $1 million?
Yeah, he sent $1 million.
Tim Cook has been there.
Yep.
Yeah, Sundar Pichai has been there. Yeah, they've all been through, and as you say, they're all kind of sending their $1 million donations to the inauguration to, show that, they're willing to support Trump, and, they want to be in his good books, which I think is really interesting to see, because as you were saying, right, we kind of have this shift where not only is Trump more in the circles of these tech people and kind of, within their sphere of influence, but you also have this shift in policy, right? Where, yes, okay, Trump and his administration really kicked off this kind of anti-China effort, right? This effort to start reining in the Chinese tech companies and to make sure that they are going to suffer in their attempts to be competitive with the American tech industry. And of course, that effort was very much replicated and picked up and continued by the Democrats and the Biden administration. And of course, Joe Biden has been building on it for the past 4 years. But now we see Trump is, kind of changing his tact here potentially. I'm sure that he will still be, on the whole, kind of largely anti-China and critical of China. But it is interesting then to see him change his position on the TikTok ban, and whether that is going to be reflected in other things related to China, whether it only matters if CEOs like TikTok CEO Xu Zichu, come for dinner at Mar-a-Lago. Yeah, what is actually going to happen there?
I mean, honestly, I think it would just take some of his advisors saying look, there's all these really popular TikTok guys and they're fans of you, and showing him some videos for him to kind of be more. He does not give a shit about the national security issue.
No. And there's also the other part of it where there was a major donor to the Trump campaign and to the Republican Party, Jeffrey Yass, I think his name was, who was very much pushing the notion that TikTok should not be banned, if I understand correctly. And that has significantly influenced Trump's position on this, it seems.
Yeah, I think he's a big investor in TikTok as well. So that guy
that would make sense. Yeah. And I think he also wanted to buy it, sort of, which wouldn't make sense if you don't want to ban. But anyway, yeah, I can't really make out the position there, but it seems that he has been an influence on Trump's desire to not ban TikTok, at least at the moment. We will see what happens.
I think more than anything, it's the way the cultural winds are blowing. I think when people didn't really know what was going on, when there were not as many people sort of who were familiar with TikTok or what it was actually about, it was easier to sort of gin up the narrative that it was this covert op sending data to China. And if it was only sort of the youngest generations that were familiar with it at that point, then it was easy to sort of influence boomers and Gen X people that on this narrative. But now, as they've sort of gained more information about it, and now that it's become less and less popular, the polling shows that, and now there's I think we're seeing a real groundswell among people who actually who use it, who are popular on it, who want to keep it. And so if Trump can sort of emerge as sort of the hero to this cohort, which again would track with the narratives we saw coming out around the election, then I think there is a real chance that he pressures the Supreme Court or pressures or starts putting signals out there that the ban should be overturned.
This is going to sound so weird, okay? So don't judge me too much. But I've been watching Survivor, the reality television show, for the first time in 15 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Listen, this is relating back to TikTok.
Just a few months ago, I watched it for the very first time. It was on Netflix or whatever. So I would watch it while I was washing dishes or something. And I was like, okay, I get it now. This whole thing is actually pretty compelling. It was interesting.
There is something compelling about it, right?
Yeah.
But what I was trying to get to was, on this season, the Pod Save America guy, John Lovett, was one of the competitors or whatever, and it's not a spoiler for me to say he was voted out on the first episode. He was a big loser. But anyway, in that first episode, they were talking to him.
Is this before he was a Pod Save guy? Was this
no, it's current, this season.
Okay.
And it's the first season I've watched in 15 years, not because he was on it, just because I happened to be at my parents' house and it came on the TV and I watched an episode and I was like, okay, I want to watch this now. For whatever reason, I was pulled in.
Is it Celebrity Survivor?
No. He was just randomly picked, I guess. But my point is that, I guess he mentioned that he was a podcaster or talked about politics or whatever. And all of these younger competitors, because he's in his early 40s or something, we're all talking about how like they didn't understand why, the government was going after TikTok and they better not ban it or something like that. And I was like, man, it's so wild to hear this conversation about TikTok on like Survivor randomly. Like, yeah, this is my total diversion from what we were talking about, but it did have to do with TikTok.
Clash of generations. Yeah.
Just to show how like, regular people are like, increasingly understanding what TikTok is, using TikTok. And so, I think today versus even a year ago and certainly 4 years ago, the constituency that would be against banning TikTok is going to be much larger because people are much more aware of what it is, all the people who use it, all that kind of stuff. And also like, the arguments, as we were saying for it, are so flimsy. But I guess my question for you is, as you were talking about there, Trump, we're not sure where he really stands on the TikTok ban at the moment. He seems to be open to going either way, and we don't know what he's going to do. The Supreme Court is going to be hearing TikTok's case before, this ban or this, kind of forced divestiture comes into place, or attempt to force ByteDance to, divest from TikTok's US operations. Whether TikTok or ByteDance would actually go through with that is another question. But do you think we're actually going to see the United States succeed in banning TikTok or getting rid of it? Or do you think this will ultimately get rolled back?
I have no idea, honestly. It's really pretty wild.
I would say no. I don't think so.
You don't
personally.
You don't think that the ban is going to stick?
I still don't think it's going to happen. And even like after the recent court decisions where it looked like almost certainly it's going to move forward, especially with what Trump has been saying recently and the big constituency that would be against it, I don't think it ultimately succeeds, or even if it happens for a little while, that it holds. Like I think TikTok, if January 19th comes and if the Supreme Court decides that the government is allowed to do this and to try to force TikTok to do it, I'm skeptical that it would remain that way and that TikTok wouldn't eventually be allowed to return without divesting of its US operations.
Yeah, I mean, so if it's a completely different scenario if Trump had lost the election, because in a lot of ways, a Harris administration would have kind of probably been more aligned in some ways with sort of the establishment, national security state.
I think Harris would have done it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it would have just gone through. I mean, the bill was passed, everything happened, but there's a fluidity with things, when Trump's in the mix, and he's much more comfortable, obviously, just kind of like wielding more executive power and just sort of getting on a soapbox and really just kind of yelling about things. And I think it depends a lot on the extent to which he decides that it's worth getting involved in this and issuing statements, pressuring the court, which is just sort of, I think there's a lot of cover. This is an interesting case because the court likes to rule in favor of free speech. The court also likes to protect national security interests. So you have these two things, and it's so funny that it's all coming down to a head, and it's come to this point again over something that has just the most minimal amount of evidence to back it up, and whether or not this is a good idea and could have serious geopolitical significance by taking such a big step and very anti sort of trade, step to ban the operation of a company, ban the operation of a telecom. I know a lot of people made the point, earlier on in the bill's development that we wouldn't have, a foreign company owning, telecommunications infrastructure on U.S. soil. So, why is this any different? I do think it's different, again, just because of the nature of data transmission and how, messy it's all become. But yeah, it really has knotted itself up into this really often sort of unparsable sort of, ball of geopolitics and tech influence. So if you look at it this way, I think it really does come down to Trump. Silicon Valley is all too happy to have this in place, right? They get a competitor out of the market. I think hawk Republicans are happy to have this in place. Again, same with hawk Democrats who, get to shout about Trump. However, they also, even if the bill gets overturned by Trump or if Trump starts beating a drum about it, they still get to say, we tried to pass this. We're tough on China. We did this, but we have to sort of go with what the president or what the Supreme Court says. So you could see this whole, narrative sort of evaporate pretty quickly as well. I do want to say that it reminds me a little bit, again, of just sort of what where this lies in the sort of the cultural schema. And that's over the weekend, nursing a hangover, we watched
What, Brian? You drink alcohol? I can't believe it.
Yeah, I know. It was the Twister reboot. So we were watching the Twister reboot.
Yeah. I've watched that. Yeah. I went with a friend of mine, and beforehand we had heard so much about how like the main guy, I can't even remember his name, apparently had this like white t-shirt scene where his t-shirt was supposed to get all wet, and like, you know, everyone was like swooning over it or dying about it. And then the scene actually came on, and all he got was like a few little droplets of water on his t-shirt. Like it wasn't like a real like white wet t-shirt scene. It was very disappointing. Let's put it that
It's
way.
interesting that you fixated on this moment. I didn't even notice that moment. I could not have told you. But what I was gonna say is like, so the whole like at the core of this movie is the fact that who you believe in the beginning is the villain is I think his name's Glenn Howell. He's the wet t-shirt guy. He's an influencer, right? Like, and the whole, you know, sort of plot point of the movie is that he's like the reckless influencer chasing the tornadoes for clicks and views, and he's in there making videos of himself. And, you know, the protagonist, who's like a more by the book tornado chaser, gets recruited by like a tech company with like MIT PhDs to go sort
That
of
bastard.
but then the twist is it turns out that the content creators are just trying to find a way to like make money to help the people, right? Like they're in it for the right reasons, even if they're brash and putting their faces on t-shirts. But then the MIT,
They're like Mr. Beast.
yes. Then the MIT guys are they've sold out to like a company that's using their data for predatory means. So the tech company is bad, who she allied herself with was bad, but it's really like the content creator. So I thought that was like an interesting sort of like cultural touchstone in that like just it reflects, at least through the lens of this one big budget Hollywood movie, that we sympathize with the content creators who are trying to navigate this system and the tech companies who are sort of the villains or the bad guys. And you could kind of see like almost like a vote for TikTok over the more faceless, you know, ossified tech giants that like run the infrastructure. So yeah,
I'll take it. Twister 2 is a pro Chinese Communist Party propaganda piece. Okay, I got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Twister reboot. Yeah.
America, very America, but to help China. Yeah.
Yeah. But so yeah, that all that is to say that, yeah, I think the cultural landscape has shifted. It's gonna, I think, be, you know, a lot it will depend on what Trump decides he wants to do with this.
Yeah. And I think it really depends on like who's whispering in Trump's ear, basically,
exactly.
right? Like, is Mark Zuckerberg going to have a lot of sway there? How does Elon Musk feel about this? And what is he going to be telling Trump?
Oh, that's
What are
interesting.
his other advisors thinking or saying?
Yeah.
I actually don't know where Musk stands on the TikTok ban. I'm sure he must have said something about it.
I mean, it's like the one thing now that we're thinking, like Musk has opinions on everything, but I cannot for the life of me recall any TikTok take that he's made. So it's just like one area where X, the everything app, has not yet ventured like into that style of like a video curation. So maybe it's like the rare case where he doesn't actually have a dog in this horse and therefore isn't interested.
Apparently back in April, you know, I'm using the Google machine, and it's not an AI overview, so I think it's probably accurate.
Yeah.
Apparently back in April, he said that he opposes a TikTok ban. And as recently as November 23rd, apparently TikTok CEO reached out to Musk for help with ensuring that the ban is not going to move forward. So maybe you'll have Zuck on one ear saying, hey, you should really ban this. It would be great for American social media companies. And then you'll have the first buddy on the other saying, hey, we shouldn't do this. TikTok should be allowed to have free reign in America.
Yeah. But I mean, more than anything, Musk just wants to stick it to his anyone who's caused him any sort of grievance.
And Zuckerberg definitely fit in like the woke category until recently. I don't know if he still does now that he's a big MMA guy.
Well, I mean, they were beefing personally. Remember when they wanted to fight each other?
Oh, right. The fight
that never happened because obviously,
yeah.
Like...
But Giorgia Meloni was totally up for it. You know, Elon Musk's fascist buddy over leading Italy.
Yeah, So I think that if anything, his like commitment to this issue is shallow at best. Obviously, it's not like immigration or, unhoused people who he likes to yell at on Twitter, or, Sam Altman, who he has like a real pointed vendetta against.
Yeah, don't forget trans people. You're basically shadow vice president. So great.
While we're talking about Musk, maybe that's a good place to put a pin in our TikTok discourse and get onto our rapid fire round of headlines to see us home. I know you had one that led with Musk here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great idea. Obviously for the past few months, and in particular for the past like month or so, we've really been watching the influence that Elon Musk has been able to have in American politics because of all the money that he spent to support the Trump campaign and Republican campaigns in the United States. We know, and I've written about this year, that Elon Musk has been building connections with far-right movements and far-right parties and far-right political figures in many countries around the world, whether it's in Argentina or Italy or Hungary or beyond. So I thought it was really notable to me recently to see that just earlier this week, Nigel Farage, who was kind of one of the architects of the Brexit campaign in the UK and was pushing to leave the European Union for years before the Conservative Party allowed a vote to happen on it, a vote that they eventually lost and the country left the European Union and has felt the effects of that ever since. But Nigel Farage was at Mar-a-Lago, which we associate with Donald Trump, but it seems to be actually to meet Elon Musk that he was there. And after that meeting, Nigel Farage said that he's now talking to Musk about getting money to fund Reform UK, which is the current version of his political party. And so, to me, that says on the one hand, who is the president here? Who is running all these things? Because you have Elon Musk meeting with like foreign far right leaders in Mar-a-Lago. But then the other piece of it is, okay, just like Elon Musk and some of these tech people use their very deep pockets to fund Donald Trump and to fund the Republican political campaign, you now have the prospect of them funding a far-right movement in the UK. And we know, because of earlier this year, that they really don't like the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. To be honest, I don't like him very much either.
For different reasons.
For very different reasons. But, Elon Musk has been, tweeting a lot about UK politics, says that they're against free speech, all this kind of stuff, and the far right in the UK is ascendant right now. And, Nigel Farage's movement, because Labour is, doing a very poor job and the Conservative Party are still struggling. So it could really shake up UK politics with this major amount of like what I think you would usually call foreign interference and foreign funds flowing in to support this party. To me, it seems like a picture of what we're likely to see now that the tech industry and, Elon Musk in particular have kind of captured American politics, that now they are looking in, next year, and I'm sure the year to follow, to extend that success and to extend that power and influence beyond the United States to many more countries as well, where they can try to have this influence.
Yeah. I mean, Musk's personal war chest now is like almost $500 billion. It's like, I think it was like $474 billion is what he's worth.
Like, it's more that you can even comprehend.
Yeah, I mean, we long ago left behind comprehensible levels. Like, it's like nothing to you to spend a couple, even $100 million on an election where you can just sort of pour that in at will.
And it's like, look at how it's worked for him, right? He spent $200 and something million on the US election, and his net worth has increased by $200 billion or something in the past little while. It's wild.
It is wild. I mean, just to even beyond the UK, even again, in American politics, he just tweeted out about a government, like kind of a very standard government funding bill. He tweeted out, this should not pass. And the Republicans who were, on board with it now are having second thoughts, and it might, stall just basic funding of the government. And the thing is, of course, that he doesn't understand what he's talking about. I can almost guarantee you that he has not read this bill. Somebody told him about it. He saw some tweets about it, and then he just fires up Twitter, and now he can pull a major lever, even when his buddy is not yet in power. power in office and just gum up the whole works. It just is such these two things, that his correspondence with Farage and possibility that he'll be shipping money and influence overseas. And, who's to say why would it stop at, at the UK? As you said, it's just going to keep rippling out. But I think we are, even now, I mean, a lot of people really hate Musk. A lot of people understand that, that billionaires are bad for this fundamental reason, that they can just use their wealth like this. But we are on like a whole nother plane now. When you have nearly $500 billion and a communication platform that is used by almost everybody in the world, so you can just immediately knee-jerk sort of wield your influence in these bursts, and people are constantly having to kind of interpret what you mean and sort of respond to it.
Or at least the power players and like influence makers, right?
Who want your money, who want your attention, who want your, sphere of influence, who want to enter that. So we are entering some uncharted waters here, and none of them are good.
Yeah, and just on that, like, it seems like Vivek Ramaswamy, Musk's partner in crime at the Department of Government Efficiency, which is a fake department that is not real, basically said that he was reading this funding bill and, pointed out the fact that it was like 1,500 odd pages and that this made no sense to him. And then Elon Musk seems to have caught wind of that and just tweeted out basically his opposition to it because it was so long.
Yeah. Yeah. The government is large. There are hundreds of millions of people who live in this country. There are a lot of issues. What really rankles is just how they can get away with this and be so stupid at the same time. They're just aphorisms, just smaller is better, efficiency. Like, this bill should we have funding bills that are just a few paragraphs because Elon Musk might actually read them if they were screenshotted onto a tweet in that case? Like, is that going to be the defining character of law that's going to allow things to be passable here, so they're parsable by someone with his attention span and his interests? Like, yeah, it's so dumb, and they are hurtling us towards this world where, not only their pet political projects are under the microscope, but things that they just like get a bad vibe about, or get some inclination to respond to, whether or not they know anything about it. And the sheer sort of nexus of wealth and power that he commands now is going to demand that people respond to it in some way or another. And it's not looking good for the next few years.
Absolutely not. And I just wanted to add one more piece to that international side of it too. Earlier this week, I wrote a piece about what is happening in Canada right now, actually. And I think one of the things that people might be surprised to hear is that we're already seeing this sort of like conservative right-wing tech axis forming in Canada as well. As a lot of Canadians have been watching what's been happening south of the border, or maybe not what's been happening at home. But Shopify, the merchant platform, is a Canadian company, is the second largest publicly traded company in Canada. And its executives are a bunch of right-wing nut jobs, if I can, put it very clearly. And they frequently tweet about the things that they hate that the government is doing. And quite recently, the leader of the Conservative Party quote tweeted the chief operating officer of Shopify, basically to praise Shopify and say that, the company is doing things right, that its executives are defending entrepreneurs, and that this is what corporate Canada should be emulating. Basically, if other corporate executives want to get in good with his party before they are expected to form government next year, that they need to be openly attacking the current government. And what we have been seeing there is that these executives at Shopify are not only, allowing Nazis to use the platform, not taking them off, hosting Alex Jones's new post InfoWars store, but the COO, the chief operating officer that the leader of the Conservative Party was quote tweeting, is a former Conservative staffer as well, who used to work with the former immigration minister the last time the Conservatives were in power. And the one other thing I will say about that is, in Canada, we have strict limits on election spending, right? So we can't have the kind of thing with the super PACs in the United States. But one of the things that we learned recently is that Shopify is actually giving free event space to an organization that was founded last month by the wife of the leader of the Conservative Party. And this is just a way to, I guess, provide some influence there, a way to kind of give back to these this kind of right-wing party.
Yeah, transactionalism, influence peddling.
Exactly. You can't give money directly, but here's a way that we can kind of help support what you're doing to show that, we're on the same side here.
I mean, that's bad, but it sounds so quaint compared to where like
Oh,
a
totally.
fire
Yeah.
hose of hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's nothing compared to what you see down there. Yeah.
But it's a definitely the point is taken. It's a sign, and obviously the Shopify folks seem like they are just taking a page out of Musk's playbook when they saw how successful it was, and just sort of like entering the public sphere and then rallying their supporters, and then just I feel like it's given it's opened things up for that level of transactionalism to be very public and more accepted. What happened in the U.S. election cycle last year, and how nakedly.
Yeah, and the CEO of Shopify has been retweeting tweets saying that Canada needs its own Doge agency to start gutting spending as well. Yeah, very fun. But I think we should move on to our other story as we kind of wrap up, what we've been talking about.
Yeah, we'll just burn through this one real quick. We've got this report that was released by the U.S. Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions.
Chaired by Bernie Sanders,
yes,
of course.
Bless him. They show that internal Amazon documents reveal that executives knew about the link between increased worker injuries and higher production quotas. That is, Amazon famously has these quotas that are like digitally updated. You have to do this many, and people are sort of working as like robots. That's a big complaint at Amazon, is that you have to work as though you were a robot. And we get into things like people are afraid to take bathroom breaks and, injuring themselves on the job. And Amazon the whole time has been saying, oh, no, it's all good. This report shows that executives knew damn well, surprise, that if you work people to the bone and try to force them to meet these robot-like productivity quotas, that they get hurt more and they get injured more. And, this is not necessarily a big surprise. We've seen reports come out that show Amazon has outsized injury rates compared with the rest of the industry, compared with warehouse workers for other companies. But this is yet another sort of pretty irrefutable bit of evidence that Amazon is just sort of grinding its workers into dust. And so it's no surprise, perhaps, that Amazon workers, in our bit of good news for the episode,
love a bit of good news occasionally.
Amazon workers have authorized a strike at 2 locations in New York, 1 in Illinois, 4 in California, all in an effort to get Amazon to bargain in good faith, which, even where the union has won its vote and even been certified by the National Labor Relations Board, Amazon is just refusing to come to the table, sometimes at all, sometimes in good faith. And so it's really also not a surprise that the Amazon workers have staged a big strike, and a multi-site strike, and are timing it to the holidays, where people might be mad if they don't get their presents in the mail, and they might blame Amazon. So it's an attempt to sort of really force Amazon to come to the table and do what it should have done in some cases years ago, which is bargain with workers over the conditions in these warehouses, and get people the protections that they need so they're not injuring themselves working like robots.
Yeah, hopefully the media doesn't decide to frame that as Amazon workers are stealing Christmas and keeping your presents away from you, instead of saying this company should be treating its workers far better, should be negotiating with these workers who have voted to form a union and have the legal rights to get an agreement with their employer. And this company continues to fight not just the desire of many of these employees to form unions, but then to actually get a fair agreement, which, the company should be forced to come to terms with.
Man, don't hold your breath though, because
yeah, I know
the very first I Googled, I was like, where are we at now? And I Googled it just before we started recording. And here's CNN, which is the Teamsters are threatening to strike Amazon. Here's what that means. And you get one paragraph. Members of the Teamsters Union have voted to authorize a strike at 3 Amazon facilities, including Staten Island, New York warehouse, which became the first location where Amazon's voted to join a union in 2022. And then not even a mention of why workers are striking, the cause of this strike, not a consideration of the workers, before going right into the retail giant said that its operations will not be affected by any of the union's actions. So we're immediately into sort of framing this around both the consumer and Amazon and making sure, like, oh, Amazon says that don't worry, shoppers, everything's going to be fine. We don't have to listen to workers. We don't have to do, and it gets worse from there.
Up here in Canada, we just went through a month-long Canada Post strike, and the workers were forced back to work by the government. Canada Post was not actually forced to come to an agreement with the workers, but throughout that month, the media kept reporting on how Canada Post workers were keeping people in the north from having, things shipped to them and really challenging these communities, and, how everyone was disadvantaged and not going to get their Christmas presents because these workers were striking, not because Canada Post itself wouldn't come to a fair agreement, wouldn't give them the pay that they deserve, but also because Canada Post is trying to change the labor model for these workers to make it so that they can use more contract work, and not have to pay overtime as they're currently, legally forced to do, so that Canada Post says it can properly compete with Amazon. So we see the effect of Amazon not just eroding the rights of its own workers, but then forcing these other workers who are in the same industry to have their rights eroded so that, we can compete, or they can compete, effectively, because for some reason a postal service needs to still operate like a business and turn a profit and all this bullshit.
Yep.
It's very frustrating.
Yeah, it ripples out. I mean, Amazon, I feel like the year of talking about AI and Google and Meta has kind of sidelined some discussions of Amazon and Uber and gig work, and sort of the way that, conditions in those companies have continued to deteriorate, and they've, wielded power in some new ways. So looking forward to next year. I know we're planning on doing an episode to sort of dig into some of those things, and I'll look forward to that, looking at like the state of gig work as we get into 2025, the state of Amazon as we get into 2025. But yeah, this is just a big reminder that that there's some real live wires in those arenas, and with solidarity to the workers who are going on strike. Don't cross the picket line.
Absolutely.
And just to end very quickly, we wanted to touch on in the UK.
Talking a lot about the UK this time.
If we have any listeners in the UK who might want to submit an opinion or a comment on this is still an open issue. The UK is running a consultation that proposes the introduction of an exception to copyright law for AI training for commercial purposes, while allowing rights holders to reserve their rights so they can control the use of their content. In other words, this would be a very big shift to the way that copyright law works in the UK, and provide an exemption so that AI companies could use creative works in their training sets and for training data if they meet certain requirements. Right now, it's, as we know, still very much an open issue as to whether or not the AI companies using creative works, using text, using stuff written by authors and artists and writers, whether or not that violates their intellectual property rights. So this would be a way to get around that once and for all. So you can, I think, submit a comment and make your voice heard if this is something that bothers you, as it should. Look up Ed Newton Rex, who has been leading a campaign against this, and he's marshaling some support against it. So check it out.
Yeah, and this was really interesting to me because it comes after a Google executive or a Google representative basically saying in September, not long after Keir Starmer's Labour government was elected, that the UK would be left behind in the AI race if it doesn't build more data centers and loosen copyright rules on AI training. So it seems like the tech companies, once again, are getting exactly what they want, regardless of the wider consequences. And that's why we need to be paying attention to these things, even when, they're not happening in the US in the core of what's going on. But, these things are going to keep spreading if we don't fight them.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Brian, I think that this is our 4th episode of System Crash. We have been given this a shot for, these past few weeks as 2024 comes to an end. And I think that we're really finding our way here. I think the podcast is going well. We're chronicling the crash of this system quite effectively.
Yep. Chronicling the crash, I think, comprehensively with sparkling, witty banter and, off the cuff insights that dazzle and entertain. Boy, who wouldn't want to listen to this podcast, I say. say.
Yeah, it's the most uplifting podcast on any podcast platform, I think.
Very much so. But it's actually been great to hear some feedback from folks. It's exceeded my expectations. I had no idea. Again, this is my first time doing a podcast, but it's been fun seeing the thousands and thousands of folks downloading and folks reaching out and commenting, and yeah, offering words of support and wisdom. It's all appreciated. So thank you, Nascent System Crashers, for all of that. It's much appreciated. And it's been fun from my end, anyways, for my region of the dystopia over here in LA.
Yeah, it's been really fun going through all this with you. And I think that, the Best Buy employee who sold you your podcasting kit would be very happy to see how it's being used today and how successful of a podcaster you're becoming.
Yeah, I'm going to load some of these onto a thumb drive and go back to the Best Buy and hand it to him in person. And he's going to go, who the hell are you? But you still will complete the circle. Yeah. Should we mention we're going to be doing our first bonus episode. So if you want to hear one more conversation between Paris and I before the year draws to a close over something to keep you warm in these cold winter days, we will have one more bonus episode in which we look back at some of the finest writings and thought of our tech titans in a little techno-utopianist reading series. So I hope you'll join us for that.
Yeah, I'll be feeling those cold days a bit more than you up here in Canada, Mr. LA. But
man, it might even get down to 60 degrees here, which I know is meaningless for you.
I don't understand Fahrenheit. Yeah. Well, if you do want that monthly bonus episode, make sure to go to patreon.com/systemcrashpod. System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Eric Wickham. Our theme music is Dystopia by our good friends in Yacht. And as we just said, make sure to support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get our first monthly bonus episode. You won't want to miss it. Thanks so much.